Tonight, the pledge for a peaceful transfer of power and the plea to heal a divided nation.
I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory.
U.S. President Joe Biden's call for unity after his party's crushing defeat.
You can't love your country only when you win.
And Donald Trump makes history with his pick for chief of staff.
All of their eyes are collectively turned towards the border.
High alerts in Canada, fearing a potential fallout of Trump's deportation threat. Canadians in the dark after a violent hurricane rips through Cuba.
We have no lights on our stairs. There's nothing in your room. No air conditioning, no hot water.
Plus, the debate over the future of Alberta's wild horses. And a century-old gem surfaces.
The post workers on board Titanic who were actually bringing mail up as the ship was sinking.
The treasured last written words of a Titanic voyager.
So that's a piece of living history.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. The 46th President of the United States spoke for the first time today since the sweeping electoral win of the man who will become America's 47th. Joe Biden pledged a peaceful transition after the Democrats' election loss. And while he did drop out of the contest, becoming the first incumbent not to run for re-election since Lyndon Johnson in 1968, many believe it did not happen soon enough, pointing the finger at him for the loss and suggesting it could now be part of Biden's presidential legacy. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malpin has more on what he said and what we are learning about who Donald Trump is bringing into his inner circle.
From the White House, President Joe Biden assuring Americans,
we're going to be okay, but we need to stay engaged. We need to keep going.
Trying to console, offering a unifying tone, and a promise to Donald Trump there will be a peaceful transfer of power.
Stop the steal!
Unlike what the nation witnessed last time when Biden won and Trump supporters attacked the Capitol.
We accept the choice the country made. I've said many times, you can't love your country only when you win.
He praised Kamala Harris for her hard-fought campaign, her loss a brutal blow to Democrats, and now part of Biden's legacy. Some blame him for not dropping out earlier, and the party for misjudging the mood of the nation, voters angry over high prices and immigration.
This is not Joe Biden's fault. It's not Kamala Harris's fault. It's not Barack Obama's fault. It is the fault of the Democratic Party in not knowing how to communicate effectively to voters. We are not the party of common sense.
Susie likes to stay sort of in the back.
Today, Trump named his campaign advisor as chief of staff. Susie Wiles just helped me achieve one of the greatest political victories in American history, calling her tough, smart, and innovative. Wiles becomes the first ever female chief of staff in U.S. history.
The ice baby.
She worked Trump's last two runs for the White House, keeping him as disciplined and as on message as possible. This time, Trump returns to the presidency more powerful, with a Republican Senate and possibly the House to enact his agenda. Trump is moving quickly on his first priority to carry out mass deportations, a costly militarized crackdown on illegal immigration, telling NBC, we have no choice. When people have killed and murdered, they're not staying here. There is no price tag.
As Trump puts together his cabinet, a key requirement is loyalty. Those aligned with Trump's goals, and this time around, they know what they want and how to do it. Omar?
All right, Joy, thank you. The Prime Minister's office announced the reactivation of the Cabinet Committee on Canada-U.S. Relations to deal with potential issues, including the president-elect's promise to conduct those mass deportations. It's a threat that could send thousands of migrants fleeing to Canada. CTV's Judy Trin has more on how Ottawa and the RCMP are preparing.
The possibility of a massive influx of undocumented migrants from the United States looms. The RCMP has been preparing for months.
We knew that should Mr. Trump be elected to be the next U.S. president, there could be an impact on irregular and illegal migration here in Canada. So we have different scenarios for whatever might happen.
The Mounties plan to increase patrols along the border with more officers and vehicles. Before its closure, Quebec's Roxham Road, the most porous point in the country, saw as many as 500 migrants a day cross over. That number could be surpassed.
We must make sure that the legal and regular entry points are well covered, which should be the case because those people that want to come in Canada know that they should not go through that way.
Migrants will be arrested, then transferred to the Canadian Border Services to determine if they're eligible for asylum. But the union representing border guards says there's a shortage of more than 2,000 workers.
We're not expecting the worst case scenario. We're preparing as any responsible government should in terms of contingencies. But we also think it's important not to scare Canadians.
There are only 3 immigration detention centers in the country. Processing refugee claims right now already takes months, if not years. Immigration lawyers expect the backlog to get worse with Donald Trump's policies.
And we've got to guard Canada and what we have here from the impact of that tsunami of refugee claimants.
For now, the Mounties are on high alert. If there is a surge of migrants, it will take place over the next few weeks before Donald Trump's inauguration in January. Omar.
All right, Judy, thanks. Elon Musk and the rest of the world's richest 10 people saw their fortunes surge after Trump's victory. The Bloomberg Billionaires Index estimates Musk, who poured more than $120 million into Trump's campaign, gained $26.5 billion as Tesla shares jumped. The world's second richest person, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, added $7.1 billion. The boost attributed to a massive bump on the stock market, with Wall Street betting Trump will lower taxes and reduce regulation. Russian President Vladimir Putin congratulated Donald Trump today.
Очень рад приветствовать всех вас на нашей...
At an international summit in Sochi, Putin also called for a, quote, new world order that challenges the West. There are also challenges ahead for Ukraine, with concerns about the Russian invasion and whether Donald Trump will pull back critical American support. Here's CTV's Alex Karpa.
Fragments of downed Russian drones have injured at least 2 people and damaged several buildings in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. This comes only 2 days after the election of Donald Trump, who has been repeatedly critical of the war.
President Trump shows himself and positions himself as a strong leader. So we hope that a strong leader of American nation would never let Putin win.
Throughout the campaign, Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance have cast doubts on continued support to Ukraine, which is concerning to some.
If they pull out or if they reduce aid, Ukraine is going to be even severely more handicapped.
Nick Kravets, who has family living in Ukraine, doesn't believe Trump will abandon the country, but says his rhetoric on the war has been worrisome.
It questions American resolve in fighting against tyranny, standing up for freedom around the world.
Denis Volkov says the question of Ukraine's survival is now on the table.
To survive, they need support from the Western world, and this is actually an investment in democracy and security.
Canada has committed over $12 billion in financial assistance to Ukraine since the start of the war and has pledged to continue to do so.
We are here for Ukraine today. We're going to be here for Ukraine tomorrow.
But experts say U.S. support is critical.
Without U.S. help, Ukraine really doesn't have a chance. It is very, very worrying. And I think for Ukraine and also for democracy worldwide.
Trump met with Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky back in September. Both leaders expressed confidence in their relationship and commitment to ending the war. But Trump says he also has a good working relationship with Vladimir Putin. Alex Karpa, CTV News, Winnipeg.
3 people have been charged in the death of One Direction singer Liam Payne after he fell from a hotel balcony in Argentina last month. An autopsy revealed the 31-year-old had traces of alcohol, cocaine, and a prescription antidepressant in his system. Those charged include a suspected drug dealer, a hotel employee, and a person close to the singer. All are accused of playing a role in giving Payne the drugs, though they are not identified. The person close to Payne is also charged with abandonment of a person, followed by death. Wildfires raging south of the border have destroyed dozens of homes. In California, strong wind gusts spread embers through this heavily populated area, starting new fires. Firefighters are battling tough conditions as they try to save structures and at one point ran out of water.
It's intense as it gets. The hair on the back of the firefighter's neck, I'm sure, was standing up.
On the East Coast, New Jersey is facing the driest conditions in over a century. Multiple fires are threatening homes and forcing people to evacuate. Cuba is in the dark for the second time in just 2 weeks after Hurricane Rafael ripped through the island nation. Streets are deserted, schools and businesses closed, and flights are grounded in Havana and Veradero, the beach resort popular with Canadians. CTV's Adrian Gobriel reports.
The weight of heavy winds leaning on Cuba's capital, simply too much, leaving the island nation's 10 million people submerged in darkness as the national electrical grid collapsed for a second time in as many months. As the sun rose this morning, some were forced to traverse a precarious commute with dangerous power lines snaked across roadways. Havana's aging infrastructure no match for Hurricane Rafael's Category 3 gusts that pulled some homes apart brick by brick. This man saying, "What worries me is my life and where I am going to live." Global Affairs Canada says 1,715 Canadians are registered in Cuba, but that number is believed to be much higher.
There is no electricity. Our hotel sanctuary has zero, only generators for the little office. We have no lights on our stairs. There's nothing in your room, no air conditioning, no hot water.
Canadians Allison and Max Drenko consider themselves to be fortunate to be staying in Veradero, which was spared from the worst of Rafael's wrath, though there's no timeline for when power could be restored to their resort.
We really don't know if this means it could be days before we get hydro.
Back in Havana, Rafael's devastating blow didn't claim any lives, though it was a gut punch for a country still pulling itself together following a separate hurricane that hit just weeks earlier.
Hurricane Rafael is expected to weaken as it spins over the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico, though there's still some uncertainty about the path the storm may track in the days ahead. Omar.
All right, Adrian, thank you. Coming up, giving new meaning to waterborne.
She's like, "Oh my God, Lindsay, you are in labor."
An Atlantic couple crosses into parenthood on board a ferry. And the push against reining in the population of Alberta's wild horses.
The numbers are getting very low for a sustainability of a unique species.
Locked out port workers in British Columbia are set to resume talks with their employers. The union representing more than 700 workers says they have been ordered back to the table Saturday. The labor dispute has affected roughly $800 million in daily activity. Dock workers in Montreal have been on strike since last Thursday, where about $400 million worth of goods are handled each day. We have new insight tonight into Canada's chaotic response to the avian flu. The initial outbreak nearly 3 years ago devastated poultry farmers and their flocks and left them and government officials scrambling. In collaboration with the Investigative Journalism Foundation, CTV News uncovered documents shedding some light on the early days of the crisis. CTV's Alison Bamford has the details.
The barns on this Saskatchewan turkey farm looked very different around this time 2 years ago.
It's devastating. It's quite a shock.
Jelmer Wiersma's operation was one of more than 400 Canadian poultry farms infected by the highly contagious avian flu. His entire flock had to be euthanized, nearly 90,000 birds.
It's a sense of relief. At least they're not suffering anymore.
It's been the largest animal health emergency that this country has ever had to face.
Since December 2021, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has destroyed more than 11 million birds impacted by the virus. Documents obtained through an access to information request by advocacy group Animal Justice show CFIA's resources spread thin trying to respond at the height of the outbreak. The agency spent millions hiring third-party contractors to assist.
We just haven't built in surge capacity at these agencies.
In some cases, those private companies didn't follow the biosecurity measures in place to curb the spread. Other times, the CFIA ran out of carbon dioxide used to euthanize birds and had to consider less preferred methods.
Many of those birds had to be manually killed, which likely means having their neck snapped.
The agency has since secured a steady supply of CO2 and is confident in its outbreak response.
And like anything that you do many times and become more proficient at it, you become more effective.
Back on the farm, it's business as usual for Wiersma, who managed to rebuild his flock.
You do things properly, and then hopefully it doesn't happen again.
Infection rates dropped drastically since the first wave. As of this week, there are only 16 active infections in the country, almost all in BC. The CFIA continues surveillance not only for the poultry industry, but now cattle, after American dairy cows tested positive for the virus earlier this year, something Canadian cows haven't seen yet. Alison Bamford, CTV News, Saskatoon.
The parents of a newborn are relieved to be back on land after an exhilarating but surprising experience at sea.
I had some family tell me that they were going to make some jokes when she was older, saying, "You was born on a raft."
Lindsay Gale and her partner Mason were on a ferry from Newfoundland to Nova Scotia for one last getaway before the birth of their baby. But little Miley had other plans, eager to make her grand entrance in the world 4 weeks early on the vessel itself.
I proposed to her last evening. The baby proposed for me.
The ferry raced to the port, arriving about 45 minutes ahead of schedule. And once it did, paramedics were waiting at the ramp to head on board to help. And baby Miley probably has a few stuffed animals already, but not as many as in the collection uncovered during a BC couple's garage renovation.
There's just stuffed animals staring at me on the other side. You can't wrap your head around it. Like, this is weird.
Stuffed animals.
Behind the walls, stuffies stuffed to the brim from floor to ceiling, 115 of them. The couple is now looking to get these orphan toys adopted after they've been cleaned up, of course. More than 5 million people watched the unexpected unveiling on TikTok. Coming up, a historic auction by an unconventional artist fetches a price far above the work's estimate. The fate of Alberta's wild horses back in the spotlight tonight. 10 years ago, a government-led cull sparked public outrage. Now, a new plan to control the population has angered animal rights activists. CTV's Kathy Lee reports.
Time seems to slow down here, the quiet only broken by the sound of their soft hooves.
We've got 4 here right now that were rescues.
This ranch, a sanctuary for some of Alberta's wild horses. For 400 years, the species has been roaming free, almost 1,500 across Alberta, but now the province says some need to go.
You silly boy.
Daryl Glover disagrees.
The numbers are getting very low for a sustainability of a unique species.
The province ordered a wild horse cull a decade ago when there were 880. Glover has been advocating to save them since.
They said that they were all full of EIA, equine infectious anemia. We proved that wrong. Then they went to the numbers were skyrocketing. We proved that wrong. Then they went to the horses are damaging the landscape. We've proved that wrong.
A 2015 range health report found wild horses actually caused little damage to the land. Most of it was caused by clear-cut logging, off-road vehicles, and cattle.
They should be focusing on restoring the health from the cumulative effects, not just scapegoating wild horses.
The province maintains it's considering all factors that impact the land. Still, it plans to thin the herd again after doubling in a decade.
this time, there is no cull.
But based on what it calls a science-based management framework. Once a population reaches a threshold, the province will reduce it through horse adoption and birth control.
But now it's time to implement some of those because those thresholds have been met.
By using a contraception and preventing birth, as far as we're concerned, that's going to lead to equine genocide.
Glover is determined to not let that happen, so these animals can keep wandering the landscape for hundreds of years to come. Kathy Lee, CTV News, near Olds, Alberta.
And from horses to fugitive monkeys in South Carolina. More than 40 of them broke free from a medical research facility east of Charleston that breeds the animals for testing. A new employee left their pen open. Local police say they are not infected with any diseases and are harmless, but a bit skittish. They say the company has located the monkeys and are trying to lure them back with food. And a painting by an AI robot has sold at auction for $1.3 million to an undisclosed buyer.
My artwork is a portrait of Alan Turing, the brilliant British mathematician.
Turing helped crack codes during the Second World War, playing a crucial role in the Allied victory over Nazi Germany. The robot behind the work is named Ada, inspired by the first computer programmer, Ada Lovelace. Developers say the work is intended to spark a conversation about how we interact with artificial intelligence and marks the first time a humanoid robot has had its artwork sold by a major auction house. After the break, a piece of history goes under the hammer. A postcard from an iconic sunken ship resurfaces. A poignant postcard written by a passenger on the Titanic just days before its ill-fated journey across the Atlantic has resurfaced and is up for auction. Here's CTV's Paul Hollingsworth.
Postmarked at 3:45 p.m., April 11th, 1912, this postcard was sent by Richard William Smith, a first-class passenger on the Titanic. His note to Olive Dakin, who lived in England, included the line, "Just leaving for the land of stars and stripes." It was just 3 days before the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank in the North Atlantic.
That's a piece of living history almost.
On the second day of the voyage, the Titanic stopped at Queenstown, Ireland to pick up passengers, and that was when the postcard was likely sent. It will soon be sold to the highest bidder at an auction house in England.
A little thing like an auction all of a sudden brings it back, and you see a person behind the story.
Historian Blair Bede says this is a tangible piece of history that fuels the never-ending public fascination with the Titanic.
Immediately, I think of the post workers on board Titanic who were actually bringing mail up as the ship was sinking.
Richard William Smith was one of the more than 1,500 people who died when the Titanic sank. The postcard has attracted a lot of global attention, especially in Halifax, where the Titanic recovery effort was based and more than 150 victims were buried.
We have a real anchor in the history of Titanic here.
The auction will take place on November 16th. The postcard is expected to fetch roughly £10,000, more than $18,000 Canadian. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Halifax.
And that's a snapshot of this Thursday. Hope you can join Heather tomorrow. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching and good night.